In a disappearing forest, a conservationist and a villager forge an unlikely friendship, exploring the true cost of saving endangered elephants from the people who live alongside them. That's the premise of The Elephant Jungle, written by Nitin Sekar, who is here with us on Books of Change Author Talks. Welcome, Nitin.
Thanks, Mikko. Great to be with you.
Yes, it's great to have you. Let's start with what I always like to start with when we talk about books. Who is your book for?
The reason I wrote the book is that I went to Buxa Tiger Reserve in North Bengal to do my PhD, and my PhD was on elephant ecology and the role that elephants play in forest ecology in the region. And I thought that was a really relevant question to conservation, right? Like that the role elephants play in forest ecology would understanding that would help us do a better job of protecting the forest and protecting ecosystems and understanding the role that people could play in those ecosystems. But as I was there, I realized that ecological question was not really at the heart of the problem of conservation in the region. That had a lot more to do with equitable development, how to make sure people got what they needed in the region, like land use planning, politics, sociology, culture. And so I figured that if I was going to write a dissertation on something that was sort of marginally relevant to the core problem, I should write a book that really explains the problem better as well. And so the audience for the book is basically anyone who has an interest in sustainable development, equitable development, conservation, even animal well-being, animal welfare in the wild especially, so that they can better understand what the problem is really like, how complex the problem is, and therefore have a better idea of how they can participate in solutions, whether that be voting differently when you're trying to make decisions as a voter, either in urban India or in other parts of the world, or being a small-time donor, or being a big philanthropist or a policymaker. I just figured that understanding the problem better would help folks who care about these issues come up with better solutions.
That comes across. Your book is a fantastic story. It's a fantastic read. So congratulations for that. Books of Change is very proud to be able to publish the book. It is being now published for the first time outside of India, previously having been published by Bloomsbury, India. Let's go into the book a little bit more. Like, tell me about the book. What's the story?
Yeah, so I'm really glad that y'all like the story. I think the other contrast I wanted this book to have with my PhD was that it should be accessible and easy to read and entertaining and really reflect the richness of experiences in this part of the world. And I think in many conservation relevant settings. And so, instead of kind of doing a survey of the politics and history of the region, the book really follows the story of my former field assistant, Netra Sharma, who was born in Buxa Tiger Reserve and raised there and struggled to make a living and has lived his whole life mostly in that reserve, and uses his life experience as a primary vehicle to demonstrate what it's like to live alongside dangerous wildlife and in an ecosystem that is kind of under pressure from development in the most crowded country and civilization in human history. And that's sort of one stream of the story. And the other stream of the story is my own experiences understanding the way this community and this region works from the perspective of an outsider. So hopefully speaking to the problem in a way that is relatable to the core audience, folks who are really interested in the issues, who want to make things better for people, for wildlife, to prevent species extinction, and also make sure animals have, are protected from unnecessary harm, but are living in a place that's very far from where a lot of these problems take place. And so the book is structured around these two narratives. But I can say, based on my experience working on these issues after my PhD, even though it's focused on two narratives, it actually really reflects a lot of problems that you see across India and in some broader sense across places where elephants and humans coexist.
Yeah. You alluded to this a little bit, but I want to hear more about how did you know you wanted to write? How did you know you want to write a book?
Well, I think that so when the book came out in India, several people asked me like, why'd you do a book versus like a podcast or some like documentary or something like that? And I think honestly, it wasn't very strategic about it. I didn't think, oh, like what is the best medium to get this message out? I like books, and I enjoy writing, so I think that sort of the medium came more naturally to me. Um, I think that maybe what really drove me is that I love science and I love statistics and I love sort of uh, facts that help you understand the world through a broader lens and those help you see the whole picture. But I do think the probably the most powerful way to convey things is through stories. And I think that Netra's story and the story of the community he was in and the story of the elephants that were navigating all these like seismic changes in the landscape that they lived in, that story would do a better job of conveying what conservation is really about than any scientific paper that I could write. And so I think I felt compelled this is my best opportunity to make this case for what conservation is about. That I should pursue it, even if it meant doing something outside of my training and comfort zone.
Yeah, the stories are pretty gripping. Like oftentimes, it is, and some of the characters are really fun. Like Netra, for instance. Like he's a funny, cheeky character. So it's fantastic to be able to join you on this journey of exploration with him and with everybody else that you shared that journey with. How did your time in Buxa change you?
So my dad, parents grew up in India and immigrated to the U.S. And he used to say that if you want things to be, efficient and organized, you should live in the U.S. And if you want things to be exciting, you should live in India. And I think that um, I think and Netra said at one point to me, after I'd been there for several months or maybe even a year, he's like, there must be something about this place that is valuable that we don't recognize as villagers who grew up here. Because you like well-educated, urban people and foreigners keep on coming here and spending time in this place that we're all trying to escape. So there must be something here that is, that we don't recognize to be valuable. And I think that um I think that a lot of us who are in conservation, we are in it, we say it's because it's about biodiversity and that kind of thing. And I think the truth is a lot of us, I can't really name a lot of species, right? Like I find some species really interesting and I kind of gravitate towards them. I think a lot of us are in conservation because it's really exciting. To share space with other species, to share space with people who understand these ecosystems and to get to know them as individuals and get to know their stories. And I think that in that sense, I hope the book conveys, yeah, there are problems in these places that people are trying to make their lives better. Wildlife, face a lot of challenges, but also there's a richness of life in these areas, right? That makes these places truly enviable and worth protecting, saving, but also just participating in. And I'm glad that seems to come out through the characters like Netra and others. Um, and I think like as far as how it changed me, I think that my interest in conservation up until my time in Buxa was sort of more theoretical than more informed by sort of theory than practice. I grew up on a lot of nature documentaries, going to zoos. I did visit wildlife reserves as a tourist when I was a kid. I'd make my uncle take me to these places, and so, but it is still pretty superficial, simplistic versions of what was going on. Um, and I think that my time in Buxa made me better understand both how complex things are, just how many stakeholders there are. Every individual in these communities living in like villages in and around a tiger reserve, they have their own aspirations, they have their own ideas of what's good, what's bad, what's progress. animals that you kind of like, you like to see animals as victims, I think, in the conservation, certainly Western conservation lore, and in Indian conservation lore as well. We're like, oh, these animals are losing their habitat, they're suffering because of us. And then you realize that, some animals are opportunistic. That they like, it's unclear, to what degree different animals have different ideas of good and bad. There's some science showing that they do have values, but it's unclear what they are, and so and you realize like, oh well, sometimes people are the victim. Sometimes animals are doing things just because they can, and because they can get away with it. And I think so that complexity was has, I think, really shaped my career and how I see the world, as well as how I see potential solutions.
Yeah, the complexity of coexistence, I think,
Yeah.
is at the core of what you're exploring and unraveling in this. Is it always, does progress for humanity always mean necessarily regression for animals?
It's a really interesting question. Um, I think that the like prevailing narrative of modern conservation kind of implies that it does.
Mm,
That as we as humans have succeeded, we've expanded our spatial footprint, which has been bad for the habitat of many of these species. Industrialization means more pollution, which arguably lowers the quality of life for a lot of species. And as our weapons have gotten more powerful, we hunt and capture more species and kill them,
right.
um, and more frequently and often in ways that are more unpleasant. Sometimes more unpleasant. I think so. I think that like if you were to ask the passenger pigeon, they would certainly be like, yeah, human progress has been really bad for us. But again, I think that there's complexity here. So if you ask the rock pigeon, right, which is a kind of the pigeon we see all
Right.
across our cities, I think that or the Norway rat or the black rat or the domestic dog, I think a lot of them would be like, wow, yeah, no, the rise of humans has been awesome for us. I think it's the Haber-Bosch process by which we make fertilizer just using like electricity. I think that's allowed us to now fertilize agricultural lands and make them much more productive. Um, that increased availability of food probably feeds a lot of animals that may not have existed otherwise. There's actually one study from Malaysia where they looked at indigenous fruit gardens. So indigenous peoples would, they clear some forest and they'd plant trees there, and there'd be more. They tend to plant more fruiting trees than is their baseline in these forests. And so then it turns out wild animals really benefited from that. The biomass of wild animals is much higher in these forests. So um, I think that some species have really benefited and others have really, not benefited from human ingenuity at the population level. And I guess the other complexity here is I think that it depends on what type of human progress. I think you're right, compared to where we are right now,
Sure.
our shift towards renewable energy could mean, there's still mining, there's still costs to the environment and any animals involved there, um, but it could mean less pollution and less climate change. And so that if we shift in that direction, it could be a win-win for humans and for wildlife. Similarly with food, if we can figure out a way to produce protein in a way that's healthier for us, but also better, use less land, less water. This is presumably going to favor both a lot of animals that are currently exploited for food, as well as wild animals that are losing habitat otherwise, due to the spread of agriculture. So I think it's more complex than like it's not a pure zero sum game. And I think perhaps the thing that's most intellectually interesting to me about conservation is the opportunity to create a field where we like really talk about what it is we want in this world. Like what constitutes success for us as humans with respect to the natural world, and what constitutes success for other species. Like what do you want to see, right? Is it just that we don't want extinction, or do we also want the other really common species in our world, like pigeons and rats and domestic dogs or feral dogs, to do well? And what does that success mean? How do we measure it? And I think that we're just sort of now moving from a place of, you know, maybe 200, 300 years ago, the typical paradigm was really anthropocentric exclusively, to see like this progress is just for making human lives better. And I think then conservation and the animal welfare movement has meant that we, in a formal way, a lot of cultures are doing this before, but in a formal way, also try and include the prevention of species extinction and some harms to individual animals. And I think that now really trying to integrate all that into one picture is one of the most exciting intellectual and moral questions in the world.
How does your work today relate to your experience in Buxa and the book? You're obviously not shying away from complex topics and complicated dynamics. So what are you working on today?
So I work for an organization called Conservation X Labs presently. Conservation X Labs, CXL, really gets at the heart of the question you asked before, Mikko, which is, are there win-wins? Are there ways for us to, come up with technologies that improve human life or improve the efficiency of production in human society, but also then make things better for other species, for ecosystems, for wildlife? And so the two things I work on at Conservation X Labs that I'm focused on as an individual and my programs are alternative proteins and rodenticide alternatives. And so the idea behind alternative proteins is what I referenced earlier, that basically people love meat, love animal products for a lot of very good reasons, but these are really, really unsustainable goods for us to produce for 8 billion plus humans. And so the question of alternative proteins is, can we come up with ways to produce these same products in the sense that they taste the same, they have equivalent or even better nutritional properties, they cost as much or less than the foods we love today, in such a way that doesn't have these sustainability problems, right? So these lower land footprint, lower water footprint, less effect on animal welfare directly, less greenhouse gas emissions, which obviously bad for the climate. And so can we find a win-win there? So that is one area. And the other area I'm focusing on is rodenticide alternatives. So currently, because of the success of rats and mice, alongside humans in across the world, both in urban areas, which I think a lot of folks in our target audience will be familiar with, but also on remote islands, right? Like basically, rats and mice have followed us to islands off the coast of Antarctica or the Galapagos and like these really remote places where these rodents basically become voracious predators of eggs and local endangered birds and other species.
Yeah.
And so in whether it's these urban contexts or these island contexts, we use rodenticides to knock down or even eliminate these rodent populations. And there are a couple of problems. These are toxins, these are poisons. So what happens is they make it harder for these animals to have clotting in their blood. So basically, if there's a small injury, like to their blood vessel or their muscle tissue or whatever, they're no longer able, their blood's not able to clot, and you patch that up. And so then gradually these animals bleed internally over often days or weeks, and gradually die very slow and miserable deaths. And so that's bad from an animal welfare standpoint, right? Ideally we don't want rodents, even rodents that we don't want to be there. We don't want them to suffer these slow extended deaths. But in addition, this is a problem for biodiversity because other animals also eat these rodenticides. In some places, in some islands, when we've been trying to get rid of the rats and mice, we also kill 60% of the animals of the very populations that we're trying to protect. And on continents, like in the US, we find that something like 80% of cougars and bald and golden eagles that have died, when you look in their livers, 80% of their livers have the residues of rodenticide. So they're also probably facing some level of morbidity or even mortality due to these toxins when they eat rats or eat other animals that have eaten these pesticides. So it's a problem for biodiversity and for animal welfare. And so it's another example of where if we can come up with a better way to control rodent populations, we can find a win-win.
Right. Thank you. Yeah. To summarize your book as we're wrapping up, what do you want your ideas, the ideas represented by your work and by the book, what do you want those ideas to do in the world?
The primary thing that I hope uh, gets into the world from this book, or at least to some people in the world from this book, is that whether you care about sustainable development or equity or conservation or animal welfare, that one of the first things we really need to do is understand the problem very well. And especially if we're doing place-based work, like trying to protect a tiger reserve or a species in a particular region, it's really important not to sort of fall back on very simple narratives of, oh, people are greedy and they're destroying this environment, or animals are just the victims of us, and any human development can lead to problems for these other species. I think it's important for folks to try and actually understand the specifics of the problem in that region, in that place, and then develop a sense of empathy for the stakeholders in that situation, whether they be human or animal, and then try and come up with a solution based on that. And I think that, again, I hope that that this is one thing that stories enable, right? The power of story, when you realize that, oh wow, these are the kind of lives that people and animals are living in the place that I care about. I hope that it enables that kind of thoughtful empathy. And I guess the second thing I'll say is, you know, in conservation, we certainly tend to focus on a few charismatic species, even though we also try to measure biodiversity. A lot of our work ends up being focused on a few charismatic species. And I think that, if you read Netra's story, through his life, there are elephants and leopards and tigers and that sort of those sort of charismatic species, but they're also their lives are entangled with peacocks and civets and black-naped hares and just all these different species, monitor lizards, fish, all sorts of fish that I don't know what their names are because a lot of them were gone by the time we got there, and they didn't. I couldn't understand the local names, but like all these species are sort of a part of this tapestry, and I think that it would be awesome if those of us who care about wildlife and care about animals and care about people, if we can sort of kind of figure out how to consider all these interests when we're trying to figure out the solution or a way forward for 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 improving these places and how we engage with other species generally.
Thank you. Thank you. I think that's what the elephant jungle can motivate people to do. I think you've done a fantastic job there with the book. The book is out now. Look for The Elephant Jungle at your favorite retailer or head to booksofchange.org to find a copy. Thank you so much for your time, Nitin.
Thank you, Mikko, and thanks to your whole team. It's been a real joy to work with y'all. I didn't know what it'd be like to work with a mission-driven nonprofit publisher, and it's been awesome. And I really hope that this is just the beginning of a long and successful journey for Books of Change.
Thank you so much.